Hi, it's Jenni Smith and here we are with our Splendid Sampler 2 sew along. This week the block is by Carl Hench and it's Betty's Bloom. It's foundation paper piecing, but obviously if you followed along when I made the flowering tree block a few weeks ago, then you totally cracked foundation paper piecing now and aren't scared at all. And actually this block comes together quite quickly. It took me a couple of hours because once you get going, then you are just repeating units, which is always good as well for getting a new process really firm in your mind. So it's the Liberty Quilting Cottons again. It looks nice with my other blocks and it's one of my favourites. I think it's really, really pretty. So stick with me and I hope it helps as always. So first things first, what you have to do is photocopy yourself some templates for this block. So you get the one sheet here, and as it says you need 4 copies of each. So I just went straight to my copy shop and made took an extra 4 sheets, so I've also kept the original, and you can put them together, and to cut out more quickly you can simply cut round 2 or 3 sheets at a time. And just like when I showed you the flowering tree block, when I'm foundation paper piecing, I don't cut directly on that dotted line. I give myself additional room because that's what you cut down to, and then the solid line is your eventual finished block lines when you're stitching together at the end. So if you can go bigger to begin with, that's easier. Stylistically, this block reminds me of the English paper piecing block we did in week 7 that was called For the Love. So what I thought might be nice is to concentrate on some of these fabrics here. They're mainly the Liberty Cottage Garden range, and to change it up a little bit so it's a kind of opposite to this block, and then they might sit nicely together in the finished quilt. So that's my first decision made. So I've cut out the shapes as instructed. This is a good block for getting confident with foundation paper piecing because you've got to repeat it 4 times, and obviously you can cut freestyle, but because you've got a lot of triangles in there and long edges on those triangles, actually it's probably more time efficient just to follow the cutting instructions. You can make them slightly simpler, so when with the cream you're cutting 3" by 1" rectangles, so I just cut one long strip that was 24 inches I think first of all, and then just subcut it. And also you don't have to worry too much with foundation paper piecing about following the grain of the fabric because it is stabilised by the papers that are going through it. So if you're using smaller cuts or scraps and you can't cut across the grain, it's not the end of the world. So I've got this as my green, I've got a light blue, a cream, I've got that lovely pink for the centre, which actually isn't on the papers, but we'll get back to that later. And then I'm using the navy up here for both of my navies. So actually there's 2 different navies in this block here, but I'm just going with the one fabric. And whilst I'm here, I'll just also show you that my key really for success before you get started with foundation piecing is to just go back in and reference your colours on each of your papers. It only takes a minute, and it saves having to unpick those tiny stitches once you get to the machine if you make an error. I just noted on here, I'm not sure if it's the same on the pattern that you'll get, but the red or pink central ones here, it says 1 3/8 by 1 3/8 rectangle, but obviously those are squares. And with these other, where it's saying for to cut the rectangles, obviously for ease you can cut 5 by 9 inches and then subcut these rectangles down if you want to. That's what I've done. So here we go. I've got one of the sections I'm starting with. So the first thing is to fold the line between 1 and 2. So you can use the edge of your add a quarter ruler or a piece of card like that. Fold that back, and then I know that it's the light blue that's going to cover this, so I'm going to take my light blue piece, flip this over, and look against the light if you need to, and put your fabric wrong side down, knowing that you're going to cover all of that area. With the first one I prefer to just glue it in position with a dot of glue, or you can pin it like that. You're then going to flip that back over, fold it back and trim this seam allowance here to 1/4 inch. So I'll use the add a quarter ruler here. Just trim that away, and then we're going to see that the next colour here is navy, B2. So turning it back over, then I'm going to line up the navy piece like this, and I'm going to ensure that when it goes back on itself, when it's stitched, that it's going to cover B2, which that one is. So then I'm going to put those together and stitch them on the machine with a stitch length of 1.5 or 1.8, and you're starting here 1/4 inch beyond the seam, going along the line and coming off to 1/4 inch afterwards. So now that I've machined it here, then you can just fold it back, right sides up, and press flat. I'm just moving on to the A sections here, and I just wanted to show you that the first shape is straightforward and adding on the cream strip. For A3, then you use this large rectangle that you've cut, and the reason that you need quite a lot of fabric is because this triangle here is at quite a long, an unusual angle here, and the danger is with foundation paper piecing that you don't have enough coverage all the way around, so it looks like a big piece of fabric for covering that, and you do end up cutting some of it away, but you do need to be able to work that angle. So if I show you from this side, you need to make sure that it's aligned here, and then when you sew it, all of that area is covered to make sure you're safe. Okay, so I'm just going to trim down. I've trimmed down the one unit here, and I'm just going to trim down this side. So flip it over, and now you're trimming with your rotary cutter or scissors to the dotted line around the shape. So just working your way, just freestyle those little bits. And like so. So there isn't a huge amount of waste, and actually these units come together quickly once you get going on them, like so. And the next step now is to join these two units together like this. So now that these units are trimmed down, like this is how they come together. So when you put the right sides together, you need to be mindful that you pin in the important places. So here, making sure that this point transfers through to the point on the back, and what's also important is where these white sections meet here, cross over. So you want that point to stay really neat on the right side, so you need to check as well and pin here, make sure that these 2 points come through and here, and then stitch that seam and press so that you end up with a unit like this that's pressed open at the back. And then once you've got those 4 units, then you can start to construct the block. Once you have done the block, then you get your small triangles. So they're the one that are just, it's a 1 inch 3/8 square cut across, and this isn't on the actual foundation piece pattern. I'm not entirely sure why it's not the last piece, but you just add it on afterwards. So basically you want the point of your triangle here, your edge meeting there, and on the other side you're just going to stitch, you haven't got an exact line, but you're using this seam allowance here, this line here, so just continue that line across to sew that triangle in place and then press it forwards. So once you've stitched that little centre triangle on and pressed it back, you cut away those dog ears, and it does look quite tiny, but then when it's stitched to, once you finish that on that 1/4 block, you can obviously then add on the other side like so, matching those points. Sorry, I'm one-handed now, so it's going to be a bit wobbly. And join the top 2 squares together and the bottom 2, and then put the whole block together. Also, I did, once I'd constructed these smaller parts, I did suddenly wonder if it would be better to pick out the golden colour or perhaps the green, you know, as my central square. So I left it and brought it back home and looked through my fabrics. I did put this one into the mix as well, but I decided actually to stick with this. But because it's the last thing that you add into the block, then you could change your mind at that point, because it's only 2 tiny 1 3/8 squares that you have to cut out of a different fabric. So I've just stitched the final seam there, and when you've got papers in, it's hard because this will actually press out a little bit when the papers are taken out, but that is off slightly. It's tricky when you get to this stage. If you look on the back here, it's quite congested when you get to this point, and I did press the seams open and pin, but if it slips a millimetre or so, then frustratingly you are out on the front. And I'm not a perfectionist, but that would bug me. So with this tiny stitch length of 1.5, I'm going to go in and just unpick that and pin again and have another go. But I'm nearly there, and I do love the look of the overall block, so it's worth staying there, hanging on in there and getting it right.